So today I'm going to be looking at this, which is the TQ6 Throttle Quadrant from Virtual Fly. Now Virtual Fly of course is most known for the Yoko yoke, which I have in my cockpit. Of course Virtual Fly makes a whole range of flight sim equipment, from desktop control panels all the way up to full motion completely enclosed simulators. But for the desktop home aviator, it's the throttle quads and the control yoke and of course the rudder pedals that are of most interest. Now when I review a piece of hardware, I don't really like to compare with other manufacturers, but this one just begs to be compared with the Cytec throttle quadrants, and I say that because from a distance it looks like, well, somewhat like the Cytec equipment. This is a TQ6, by the way. Virtual Fly does a TQ3 as well, which is a single engine, so you've got three levers, throttle, prop and mixture. This is basically two of each for a dual engined aircraft. But to get back to the point, the TQ6 from a distance looks very similar indeed to the Cytec ProFlight Quadrant, of which I have three in my cockpit here, which you can just about see at the top of my... I've got them mounted upside down here in the manner of a twin otter. Now the only reason I'm pointing that out is to make it absolutely clear from the outset that the similarity is visual and completely superficial. This thing's built like a tank. If you put this on the scales, this is just shy of 3 kilos. It's entirely made of metal. It's actually quite hard to hold it up in one hand like that for any length of time, and you know, you could kill somebody with this quite easily, which is going to be a bit of a challenge for mounting it. You know, I was thinking of mounting it for the purposes of a review temporarily just somewhere over on the right hand side of my cockpit until I decide where it's going to go permanently. That's going to need quite a substantial bit of engineering to mount that on. Just saying a little bit about the mounting. The quad comes with a bracket like this, and again this is familiar to if you've got the Yoko yoke. I haven't decided quite how I'll do this yet, but you get screws so you can put the bracket which way. You can mount it on the back like this, or you can mount it on the bottom like that, whichever way around is going to be convenient, and then just clamp it to... I mean, the most basic way to mount it is to mount it on the edge of a table. Now the maximum thickness of table or other piece of hard timber you can mount this to is difficult to measure actually. 2 inches or 5 centimeters, which should be adequate for most cases. But there is an alternative clamp which is available, and if I just show these side by side, and it's an identical clamp except that the throw of the clamp is much larger. I think it goes up to 3 inches or 3.5 inches, or in centimeters, what is that? That's about 8.5 centimeters. Now I hadn't intended to buy this. This is an add-on that's available as an optional extra if your mounting requirements are a little bit more extreme than the norm. And they sent me this by mistake. I actually intended to order the alternative clamp for mounting the Yoko, which hopefully we'll talk about that on another day. So let me just say a little bit more about this throttle quad before I go ahead and try and figure out how to mount it and then put it through its paces. I mean, I hardly need to really say what the thing does, but just in case anybody's watching who's not too au fait with these things. This is for a dual engined aircraft. Of course you can fly a single engine aircraft with this as well. It's got 6 levers which are designated power, prop, RPM and mixture, and of course you can fly a piston aircraft or a turboprop aircraft, and the levers can be mapped to the functions that you need. You can fly a jet aircraft as well, in which case it doesn't make quite as much sense in terms you won't have propeller controls, mixture controls. not relevant to a jet aircraft, but of course you can make use of these levers by mapping them to things like fuel cut-off condition levers in a turboprop, or whatever you want. Now this presents to Windows as a standard HID, human interface device, which means that you can use this in anything that essentially can understand joystick controls, and you can map the axes to whatever you want. Of course, it obviously makes most sense to map them to power, prop and mixture. We'll say more about the mapping and maybe see this in action when I get the thing installed. Now the levers themselves are made of metal as well. The knobs on whatever you want to call these on the ends of the levers are, I think these are made of metal as well, and they're painted or powder coated or something. One consequence of that is you can't interchange the heads as you can on, let's say, the Cytec or even the CH products quadrants. Now that doesn't mean you can't map these to other functions, but you know, these are coded as they are in the real world with not only the colour of the knobs but the style and shape of the knobs, so you can actually distinguish these by touch if you're not looking at the quad. One consequence of that is you can't mount this upside down as I have in my cockpit, and I've done that because in some aircraft, notably the Twin Otter, the throttle quad is mounted up there. And I mean, obviously you can mount this upside down and it will work, just accept that they're in the opposite order, so the power lever is the one that's furthest away from you. I don't see any real problem in doing that. What else to say? These levers all have a détente position, which is a very positive click, and I have yet to try programming this or to read anything in the documentation, but I'm presuming that you can map that to hopefully a button click in your flight sim of choice, whether that's using X-Plane, SPAD.next or FSUIPC. So we'll get around to that when we look at the programming. Another thing here is we've got knobs at the outside edge. If we look at the one on this edge, this is just a rotary knob. It's a friction control. So if I wind that all the way down, there's basically no friction on these things at all, which, you know, you don't want it like that. But you've essentially got variable friction. You can tighten that up and they stay where they are. But you can basically tune the feel of the quad. I have to say that the feel of these levers is very substantial and chunky. You might not see this, might not recognise this until I point it out, but the levers are kind of staggered. It looks a little bit odd, but let's say the power levers, one of them is straight, the other one is kind of bent in or hooked in, so that the two knobs are close together. The advantage of that is, it's hard to say, this is so heavy, is you can basically hold both of those knobs in one hand with the levers between your two fingers, and that's very convenient. That's only for the power levers, because the power levers are the only ones that you really need to operate in that way. You'll also see that the power levers are longer as well, which indicates that that's something that you know, typically when you're flying the approach or the takeoff, you keep your hand on this. And the other two sets of levers, I mean, they are kind of dog-legged, but that's to maintain the separation between the pairs of levers. One of the criticisms, if you have, well, even one of the Cytec throttle quads, if you're using it for throttle proper mixture, or if you have several of them side by side as I do, the levers are actually too close together. So if you're operating the power levers like this in the Cytec quad, these levers are much closer and they get in the way. So now that's good design, obviously, on the part of Virtual Fly, but it's also how the thing's designed in the real world. You know, in the real world, the ergonomics get much more scrutiny than in essentially a toy system like the Cytec. What I didn't say about the detents was semantically speaking, those things have meaning generally in the functions that are available on a throttle quad. In the power levers, going into the detente typically activates reverse thrust, and it's actually marked up that way. On the prop levers, going into the detente activates the feathering of the props, or one prop, and in the mixture that'll be idle cutoff, or you might map that in a turboprop to ground idle or something like that. Coming back to the friction knob, so I demonstrated the friction knob on this side for the power levers. There is another friction knob on the other side, and that's it. There's a total of 2 friction knobs. Now you don't need to be a mathematical genius to recognise that means a certain amount of doubling up. This friction knob on the outboard or right hand side of the quad, it controls the friction for the prop and the mixture levers. So you can't set those independently, but you wouldn't really want to. I mean, those are levers that, during flight they get adjusted periodically. You can see inside the quad to see a little bit of the mechanism. You can see some gearing and stuff. You might have expected these slots to be screened off in some way to avoid, I suppose, dust getting in. You might worry that getting dust in there would affect the operation. Now, I haven't taken this apart, but I have seen a video of it being dismantled, and it's clear to me that the potentiometers are well out of the way, and actually they do seem to be very well sealed, and I'm sure they're extremely high quality industrial strength potentiometers rated for millions of turns. So I wouldn't have thought there's going to be any problem with dust will get in here. Undoubtedly, I don't think it's going to cause any issues with the operation. I'm pretty sure, by the way, that this quad and the TQ3 do actually use potentiometers. They're not Hall effect contactless, in other words sensors, they're potentiometers. Okay, next job, find a way to mount it, then we'll be back. So we got the quad mounted in a sensible position for test purposes. At least this is a temporary position obviously, but it's secure and it's very usable. And what we need to do now is have a look at how to set this up in Windows and also in the flight sim. I'm going to be using X-Plane and FSX for test purposes, and then of course to take it for a spin and see how it flies. So it's just worth taking a quick look at setting this device up in Windows and in the Sims. Now in truth there isn't too much to say about this. It isn't after all much different from setting up any other joystick device or game controller device. But the one thing that's worthy of a little bit of attention is setting up that analog detente, particularly for reverse. So we'll look at that. The first thing we're going to do is look at this in Windows. And so if you go into Control Panel, you'll find the Virtual Fly TQ6. If you go to Game Controller Settings, select it from the list and go Properties. Now you can calibrate the device from here. Well, we'll go through the motions of that because I want to look at one particular aspect of that. If you go to Calibrate, I mean this is confusing because it looks like it's treating it like a joystick with X and Y axes. The interesting part about this is if you click Display Raw Data and then you move the first 2 handles all the way up and down, including into the detente, we see the raw data, and this varies between, well, at the moment 22 and 720 something. Now this tells us this is almost certainly a 10-bit controller. That means it can resolve 1024 different positions, which is fairly respectable. Many of the joystick controllers you will have experience of have probably got 8-bit controllers in, so 255 different positions can be resolved. Some controllers go the other way. The MFG Crosswind pedals is a 12-bit controller. We look at the raw data there, 4096. I'm pressing one of the pedals there. Anyway, coming back to the plot, you can and you probably should calibrate the TQ6 in the Windows calibration screen. I'm not going to go through that because you've probably done that 100 times before. So that's the first thing. We've got 10-bit potentiometers inside of this quadrant. Next thing we're going to look at is how to calibrate this in FSUIPC. So here we are in FSUIPC editing the profile for the Twin Otter. Now this is already set up, but if I just go through the motions, if I click rescan and then move the left hand power lever, you can see that's mapped to throttle 1, and rescan, right hand power lever is mapped to throttle 2. So we'll go to joystick calibration. We want to go to separate throttles per engine. It's throttle 1 and throttle 2. You can see they're set up. We'll take the first one as that's the top region that says throttle 1 direct. Take that as an example. We put the lever in the detente position. We click the central set button. That records the idle detente position. We pull it into the reverse zone. Click set prematurely there. Pull it into the reverse zone. Click set. Then we push it all the way to the forward stop and click set underneath where it says max. And now we have that throttle calibrated. We'll do the same for the right hand lever, which is throttle 2. Put it in the detente position, click set, pull it through all the way to the bottom. We'll click set under where it says reverse here, and then we push it all the way to the forward stop and click set underneath max, and that's done. And so if we now drop out of this into FSX, okay, so here we are in FSX. So if I just move the power levers forwards, we've got, as we expect, forward application of power and the torque gauges are rising. That's back to the detente. If I pull it through the detente backwards, you'll see that the levers move backwards and we've got full analog control. And you should also notice, I'm not moving these very smoothly at the minute because I'm looking at the screen and trying to do this by feel, but you should also notice towards the bottom left of the screen the beta mode lights have illuminated as well. So there we go. If we go to the TQ6 manual, you'll see there's a section for configuration in, well, it's X-Plane 10. I don't know, I've never had X-Plane 10, so I don't know. I think there's been some substantial changes to how the user interface works with X-Plane 11. So it may be that this is actually out of date. But importantly, the first thing it says is the TQ6 is compatible with X-Plane, but you won't be able to use the reverse, feather or cutoff functions. But there are ways to use those detentes and the reverse functions in X-Plane 11, and I'm doing it using spad.next, so that's what we're going to look at next. Now I'm not going to map my throttle axes in spad.next. That's because I have them already mapped in X-Plane itself, but I'm going to add an additional mapping here. Let's choose this. This is the throttle 2. So if I click on that to select it and click add event, instead of adding a standard axis, I'm going to add a custom axis, and I'm going to say range definition yes, and essentially what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select the detente range, or the range below the detente, and you can do that by setting the from value. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick it slightly into the detente range and click from set, and then all the way to the bottom and to set. So that is the range of values that it's going to detect one time. So this is a one shot. Essentially when I flip it into this zone, the first time it registers it's going to do an action, and the action is, well, it's actually going to set a data value, and we're going to find a data value in X-Plane called, let's try reverser, thrust reverse toggle. That's what I want, and I want to set it to 1. That's all I want to do. Say yes. And what that does is, when I pull the lever through the detente into that range. SPAD.next detects that the lever is in that range, and one time only calls the toggle reverse function. And then what that does is it changes the operation of the power levers, so that then when I roll the power levers up, instead of operating in the forward thrust range, they operate in the reverse thrust range. And then to flip back into normal operation, I pull that lever into the detente again and then out, and it toggles it back to normal. I hope that made sense. Now the important thing is you want to do this on one of the two axes only, because otherwise if you pull both levers into the detente, it'll toggle the reverse on and then off. In fact, it's unpredictable what it does. So that's how I've implemented reverse thrust in a fairly simple way using X-Plane 11. Next thing we're going to look at is Virtual Fly ships a program with its TQ6 and indeed the TQ3, and this is it. You do have to, this program, it's a setup program, but it's also well, in a sense a driver program. This has to be running while the host program, say FSX or X-Plane, is running. And this shows us the positions of all of these sliders, and this is the most graphic illustration of the very interesting and, in my experience, unique feature of this device, which is that you have below the detente you have an analog region which is most useful on the power levers for mapping to a reverse thrust function. That's all there is to say about this, really. I mean, it's got features for calibrating the detente point, and also for this button down at the bottom here, calibrating the lever's parallelism. This is a function that's also available in FSUIPC if you use that, to try and keep the levers in step as you move them up the scale. That's all I'm going to say about this, and I'm not actually going to use this program because it really doesn't offer anything over and above the things I already use to map my axes in either X-Plane or FSX. So we're just going to close that down. Okay, we're starting in X-Plane, we're in the Beach Barren, and we're cold and dark. We've got to start this up, and the throttle quad plays a part in the startup. So there's the quad down there in the cockpit, and if I just move, it's not very well lit there, but you should see those levers moving. So we see as we go, we need electrics, avionics are off, we need to unfeather the props, we'll do both. These gauges go a little bit wild. This is the Coronado B58, not quite sure why those gauges are glitching. We're going to start the right engine first, so we need to mixture to full rich. We need to prime the engine, so we put the power lever to wide open. We need to find the fuel pump switch, which is actually behind my throttle quad at the moment. It's a little bit inconvenient. Prime the engine until we get peak fuel flow, close the throttle, crack it a little bit, hit the starter. That engine's started up. We need to set the idle RPM to about 1200. Can put the right generator on. Then we're going to repeat that all that for the left. So we're going to mixture to full rich, throttle wide open, go for the fuel pump, close the throttle, open it a little bit, and we can go for the starter, and it's started. Again, we've got to make sure we've got a sensible idle RPM. Put the other generator on, and we can have avionics. So we're pretty much ready to go. We're going to let this aircraft warm up. This is the Coronado B58 with the reality expansion pack. The throttle quad in this test position is a little bit inconvenient, a little bit too far back. Got my arm crooked a little bit more than is comfortable. When I mount this permanently, it's going to be a bit further forward, pretty much in the same position, I would think. Just line us up, more or less, a little bit off the centre line, but who's counting? Just check those temperatures. Well, we're kind of close-ish with the temperatures. One notch of flaps. Make sure takeoff trim is set a little bit high, nose high trim, which is good. So let's get going. Back a little bit on the power levers, trim it forwards a bit. Now what we want to do now is we want to set the RPMs for, we're doing a climb, but we're doing a kind of a cruise climb, so we'll stick with this speed, but we want to come back on the RPM to give us a more efficient cruise. If we're watching the fuel flow, that should be diminishing. We're watching the RPMs to make sure we stay within the green arc, pretty much towards the bottom of the green arc there. Now, because this is a twin engine, you can hear those engines beating against each other. The prop rotation speed's not precisely matched, which is what this synchroscope in the centre of the gauges is telling us. So what we need to do is tweak the prop RPM levers so that synchroscope is more or less stationary. Make sure the power lever settings are matched as well. Whoops, I just nudged the lever again. So that's more or less stationary, and then we can click on the auto sync. The other thing we want to do is, as we climb, because the air density changes, we want to lean the mixture. We're above 3,000 feet now, so we want to lean the mixture. We typically do that looking at the exhaust gas temperature gauges. I'm not sure they're reading correctly actually. They look like they're on the stops. So normally we'd do that, we'd lean the mixture until we get an increase in exhaust gas temperature. Is that happening? I'm not sure those gauges are working, or I'm not reading them correctly. But we lean the mixture for peak performance, and basically that's what those levers are for. So that's pretty much it. You know, all I can say is that so far this throttle quad's performing admirably. The levers have a very solid feel to them. The action is very smooth. If I just roll off and then on the throttle, if we watch the gauges, they're coming down smoothly. That prop sync mechanism is doing its job. And then if we roll back on, same deal. No spiking detectable in that. power setting. Now the other thing we could do, just by way of example, just by way of experiment, is we could simulate an engine failure. And we're going to do that just by, let's imagine the left engine's going to fail. We're just going to pull the mixture to idle cutoff. So we're getting an immediate slew. What we need to do pretty pronto is to feather that dead engine, which is the left engine. So I'm going to bring that down to the feather position. That should help us with the yaw. We might need to set a bit of rudder trim. That's too much rudder trim. Then we can set that power lever to idle. Need to turn off the prop sync now. Doesn't make sense anymore. So we need to turn back towards the airfield, and we'll try and land this baby with one engine. Now if there's any real pilots out there, you probably noticed I'm already making a mistake. I'm banking it towards the dead engine, which you should never do. But actually in the sim that doesn't really have much of an effect. The theory being it's harder to pick up the wing with the dead engine on it. And you see that works fine for me, so I'm not going to bother with that. So we want to stop climbing, we want to level out. We don't want to overstress this live engine. There's a nice animation on that engine there. It's nodding backwards and forwards in the slipstream. I mean, what should happen is that engine should start to if I unfeather that, I'm not sure if it will unfeather actually. There you go. Yeah, so if I unfeather it using the prop lever, it starts to rotate again. In fact, I've got it slightly unfeathered and it's just continuing to windmill there, which should give me more drag. If I put the pitch a bit finer, it should start to windmill properly. There it goes. Of course, it's not running and it is dragging, so we want to keep that feathered. So we're at 3,500 feet. We need to get back to the airfield. We'll activate direct 2 on the GPS just to help us make sure we know where we're going. We want to kind of start slowing down and descending now. If we put that prop all the way forwards now, slow down enough to put down the gear. I think 152 is gear speed in this aircraft. Keep the flaps up so we're sure we're going to make the strip. Kind of plummeting now, so we do need to trim it up. Pull that dead engine into the top now to keep it out of the way. That has no meaning in the piston engine. I can go flaps 10 now. It's going to slow us down a bit. Full flaps. I'm not doing a very expert job of this. Okay, we trimmed about right now. Well, that was a bounce and a half. So that was the Beach Baron using the TQ6 Throttle Quadrant. I'm taxiing a bit fast here. Slow walking, or no, fast walking pace we're supposed to be taxiing at. Just complete the journey by getting us into kind of a parking. We'll just park here, I think. So we parking brake on, and then we're going to shut down the other engine, and we do that by feathering the prop, mixture to idle cut off, and then we're done. Okay, this time we're in FSX and we're flying a turboprop aircraft, the Twin Otter of course. I'm not going to go through the startup, there's nothing different really to see there. However, one difference is in this particular turboprop aircraft we're not going to have anything to do with the red levers. These are generally condition levers in a turboprop. This particular turboprop, they just act as fuel cut-off levers, so we're not going to tinker with those. However, we do have the prop levers which operate the same as they do in the constant speed props in something like the Beach Baron, which we've already flown in X-Plane. The power levers are more sophisticated in a turboprop. This aircraft is set up essentially with two analog ranges. You can see that on the Twin Otter's throttle quad there. We've got a reverse zone as well as a forward zone. If I just displace this forward slightly from the idle detente, that's power in the conventional forward sense, but I can also go through the detente into reverse, and that's actually an analog axis. You can see I've got control over the amount of reverse thrust there, and you should also see the beta range lights go on the console when I go into that range. That's just set up with FSUIPC, but let's just get this up in the air, flying around, see how it feels. One of the main things we're looking for in this aircraft is as a turboprop. It's more sluggish to respond essentially to changes of power, and in FSX the turboprop modelling is kind of unsophisticated. So what we're really interested in is smoothness, no spiking, consistency of control, and we've got to have a good, I suppose, predictive sense when we're rolling on and off the throttle, because there's a big lag in terms of how quickly that power comes in or drops out. So that's the main thing we're looking for. We've got to be careful of the torques and temperatures. We'll come back to those torque gauges in a second. But for now, we've dialed in enough power to get us rolling. That should be enough speed to rotate. take it too high. We're going to just take it around the block, come in and do an approach, get the flaps in now. Now, as we did before, we're going to adjust the props to give us better cruise economy in terms of fuel burn, but also more efficient prop pitch is essentially what we're doing. So we're going to go across to the prop levers, we're going to adjust these down, we're going to keep the props RPM within the green arc on the RPM gauge, but we're also looking at the torque pressure gauges. The torque will go up as we coarsen the props, and there's a red mark that we don't really want to exceed. And what we can do is actually, because we want to go a bit faster and adjust the angle of the prop pitch a bit more, we need to come back on the power. That gives us some more headroom for the torque, so we can come back a bit more on the props. You should hear the engine note change as we're adjusting those props down. So we're about halfway down the green arc and we're at the torque limit, so we're going to leave it there for now. We don't have a auto prop sync in this aircraft, we don't have a synchroscope either, so we just have to judge it by ear. So those controls, again, they've been nicely smooth, and if I just tinker with the prop levers again, if we watch the prop levers in the virtual cockpit, they're moving nice and smoothly in response to the levers on the quad, and when I let go of them, most importantly, they stay put. When you've got a cheap throttle quad or one that's close to worn out, you get a lot of spiking and they won't stay where you put them. So that's a huge advantage so far of this particular quad. So right, let's just turn around and go back and put it back down. So I'm pulling the power back now. We've got a reset props indication on the caution panel, so we're going to put the props back to fully fine and just set it up on a long approach, gradually slowing down. Alright, so I'm slowing down, I'm going to go to some flaps now. I'm going to ease off a little bit on the friction on the power levers, just so I've got a more responsive control on short final. Flare it very gently. Come off now, I'm on idle, just holding off. So we've touched down, I can pull it straight through that detente into reverse. That slowed us down, so I'm back onto, whoops, not sure what I did there, maybe touched one of the brakes. Okay. So that's the turboprop. So that's the TQ6 Throttle Quadrant from Virtual Fly. This is a fantastic piece of equipment. Very sturdy, robust, smooth in operation. Does exactly what it's designed to do. Of course, there's not a lot really to say about this that hasn't been said before. You know, it's a very simple device at heart. It's basically 6 potentiometers set up to control conventionally your power prop and mixture controls. One thing that this device has going for it that many of its competitors don't have is this detente with an analog region below the detente. So in effect you've actually got 12 separate analog ranges, you might say, available on this quad. Now it certainly looks the part, but that aside, functionally speaking, this is about as robust and as high quality as it gets. This will probably outlast any of your other flight sim equipment. Almost nothing bad to say about this beyond the price. I mean, the price, you'll be aware if you're watching this review that this is not a cheap item. This retails for €542, which is a fairly eye-watering price point. At current exchange rates, that's about £480. It's not much shy of $600 US. You can buy the TQ3, which is a half-sized, essentially, version of this with 3 levers. That's about £100 cheaper. You know, that's not a lot cheaper, and really I can't say that it's economical to buy the TQ3 unless you've got a good reason to do so. You know, if you're setting up, well, if you're a flight school and you want to mimic a particular aircraft or category of aircraft, fair enough. Or if you're building a cockpit where the appearance is a significant part of the deal, by all means buy the TQ3. But the price of the TQ3, at the end of the day, it is still more than 6 times the price of a Cytec 3-lever throttle quad. But as always, you get what you pay for. The only slight niggle, which is not really a niggle, that I found with this in practice, you may recall when I was doing my flying that I was adjusting the tension of the power levers on the go. Now that does work, but I did discover in doing that it can introduce slight differences in the feel of the 2 power levers if you adjust that on the fly. So one ends up being slightly easier to manipulate than the other. Now that's not actually a glitch. If you look in the manual, it does mention the fact that when you adjust this, you're supposed to adjust it to the tension that you want and then exercise the levers through their full range of travel up to 10 times. And presumably that's something to do with the mechanism by which the friction is distributed between the 2 levers. And indeed, when you actually follow that instruction for adjusting the friction, it works fine. So as I say, not a glitch at all, user error if anything there. It's difficult to say what they could do to make this throttle quad any better. I mean, there is an argument for interchangeable caps. In fact, that wouldn't work. I was talking earlier about the possibility of mounting the quad upside down. That would take more than just interchangeable caps for the levers, because you'll see the levers are different lengths. But it would be possible as a compromise to have the levers all the same length, kind of in the manner of the, well, confusingly named TQ6 quadrant from GoFlight. Now, I should hasten to point out that quadrant is not in the league of this one, so don't consider it as a competitor. But it does have, I think I'm right in saying, uniform levers across the board. So there it is. That's about all I can think of to say about the Virtual Fly TQ6. It's certainly well worth having. It's going to have a home in my cockpit once I get it mounted permanently, and it's a fantastic piece of equipment, highly recommended. At the end of the day, nothing bad to say about it other than its fairly eye-wateringly high price. So is it worth £500 of your money? Well, that's for you to decide, but I dare say if you do invest in one of these, you'll never have cause to buy another throttle quad.